You booked to come and hear Christina Oxenberg.
It was a trick.
So
have Hugo Vickers
I've inflicted
instead.
myself on you as well to just to ask her some questions and things like that. We might start with this particular image and then
Oh, right.
this one.
All right, that'll be Sister Catherine. You may have heard of her. She was on a TV show called Dynasty. Yeah. So, I am not Catherine. If you were expecting to see Catherine, now would be a good time to leave. But I wrote this book and I called it Dynasty because it wasn't my idea. I'm not that funny, unfortunately. It was suggested to me by my Serb professor, Čedomir Antić, who's very well known over there, and of course nobody even knows where Serbia is, so that's moot. But he recommended that I call the book Dynasty. Serbs have a wonderful sense of humor. So we had a good laugh. And then he said, no, I think you really should. And I said, well, it does fit, and it is funny, and I like that. But Sister Catherine's not going to like this. And he was like, well, who cares? So luckily I ran into my cousin, the Queen of Spain, and I said, look, I have this dilemma. I have this book, I want to call it Dynasty. What do you think? And she thought, and she said, wasn't your sister on a... And then she exploded laughing. And she said, well, it can be called nothing else.
That's right.
So it's her fault. And it's endorsed by her, the name, and Catherine can speak to the Queen of Spain rather than me if she doesn't like it. So that's how that happened.
And here we have, in fact, the whole of the dynasty or dynasty. And
Right.
just if, I don't know how easy it is to see, but this is the whole of the Karadjordjevic family that you're going to get, and Christina is on the far side here.
I'm at the end.
And you'll meet some of the other characters.
I didn't breed, so I really am at the end of my line.
And did you want me to explain how you fit into some of these things?
Yes,
Is that
sure,
right?
go ahead.
Because it's very complicated, because obviously there's the Karadjordjevic side, but Christina's grandmother, who she will talk about, Princess Olga, there were the three sisters you will know, Princess Marina, Princess Elizabeth, and Princess Olga. They were three Greek sisters, and of course they were all first cousins of Prince Philip, which makes you a first cousin once removed. And in the middle of the night, Christina said, you've got to find out how I'm related also to the Queen. So I sat up late and worked out that she is a fourth cousin.
The drama.
A fourth cousin, about twice removed of the present Queen, descending from the King of Württemberg, and also, of course, descending from George II.
You have
So that's
nothing to
probably
worry about. I'm not taking over.
But the closest relationship I could find really was through Queen Mary and the Tecks, being the Duke of Teck being a grandson of the Duke of Württemberg, and
Well, I think the Queen's husband is my close relative.
well, he's the
so
first
I
cousin
think that
once
would
removed.
probably
Yeah,
be
exactly.
the closest.
Yes. So
These will be my best friends because they're late. That's how it goes.
but also
Welcome.
you will be talking about Prince Paul of Yugoslavia, who was her grandfather. We'll come back to him in a minute.
Right. Oh, yeah, you wanted to flip through them.
Yeah, I wanted to sort of introduce some of the characters. And Princess Olga, photographed by Cecil Beaton in 1939 when she was staying at Buckingham Palace.
That
And-
backdrop is a fake. It's a carpet hung on a door. Just letting you know, things are not what they look like. But the tiara is real and is hers.
Yes, and then, I don't know, maybe we'd like to talk a little bit about the youth of Prince Paul, because there he is getting married, and of course the future King George VI was his best man at the wedding, and they were very close at that time. So, over to you with Prince Paul.
So that's the wedding is around 1922. Obviously, much has happened to my grandfather before that. He's born in Russia, in St. Petersburg, in 1890-something, 93, I think. Sorry. So he's born in Russia to a princess, a strange kind of royalty because it was a title bequeathed by Napoleon to someone so that his niece Matilda could marry somebody grand who had a lot of money but no title. So they fixed that, gave him a title, and then the title came down through what would become the Demidov family, which is my grandfather's mother, Aurora Demidov. And she was everybody's real idea of a princess, in that she was beautiful. She had all the ball gowns you could dream of, all the jewels you could imagine. And she was completely miserable, absolutely the most unhappy person on earth. She was introduced to her husband, Prince Arsène, the father of my grandfather. And Prince Arsène is one of my favorite characters in this book because he's so unbelievably dangerous, lethal, and ruthless, and rather fascinating, frankly. Anyway, so he was friends with the Tsar. He was living in Russia. They moved around a bit. The Tsar decided he should marry this Demidov lady because she had a lot of money. He had a title. It all fit. She got pregnant right away, and he split. Never to be seen again. He just wasn't the domestic type, is what he discovered pretty quickly. And he liked war. So he just went and enlisted anywhere there was a war. He went to Asia, he fought for the French, he fought for the Russians, he fought in the Balkan Wars. And what's most telling about him is that after the Balkan Wars, which is really the reason for World War I, but I won't bore you all with that because that's another story. But Arsène had displayed such ferocity during the Balkan Wars that he was thrown out of the army. Imagine how bad you have to be thrown out of the Serbian army. So he was not allowed to fight for them in World War I, which is, I think, stunning. Like, wouldn't you want your most lethal warrior? Well, no. So he was like, okay, fine, I'll go to France and fight for them, which he did. So all he did was entertain himself with wars. He liked to drink. He liked gambling. He was pretty modern, really. He liked the ladies. They weren't fond of him because he was too much of a drunk. I think a Parisian barmaid turned down a marriage proposal, which is pretty humiliating, but did happen. And when there was no war to fight in, he would challenge friends, or I suppose foes, to duels and shoot them in the nether regions, because he thought that was amusing, which I think is Serbian humor. So he was busy. That was his life, and he was exiled from Serbia long before our family were. It was only Serbia, of course, at the time. There is no Yugoslavia yet. Anyway, but he is expelled for just being too bad, which makes me love him and assume I'm probably exactly like him. Anyway, but his wife was abandoned before my grandfather was born. Prince Arsène was long gone, brandishing things. Princess Aurora gives birth, and it turns out that she's equally uninterested in having anything to do with a normal life. So she spends Paul, my grandfather's name is Paul. She spends his first life on earth shopping him around, begging relatives, friends, shopkeepers, anyone to take him. She's just not interested. And eventually there's a relative, they remember Peter, who could be the king of Serbia if there was still a monarchy, but there wasn't. That's the other story. And so
he goes to and then of course you said he had a pretty miserable childhood.
Well, right, yes, okay. So Aurora manages to give him away, age 1. And he is sent to Peter, who becomes King Peter of Yugoslavia, but we'll get to that if Hugo can remember to keep me on track. So Paul, at 1 year old, is put on a train with his Russian nurse, and he only speaks Russian, of course, if he's speaking much at all. Maybe he's one or two. They get on a train, they go to Switzerland. He's delivered to this uncle or cousin who has 3 children who are much older than him. And he has no mother, he has no father. He's born in Russia. He's not born in Switzerland. He now has to learn new languages. He's probably learning French and German. At the same time, he's now 3. And his Russian nurse, who is his only bond, and if you're a maternal type at all, you'll understand this is all he had, is sent back to Russia. I hope you cry now. So, and he is incarcerated in a boarding school. That's the end of his childhood. Age 10, Serbia has a coup. The Obrenović, the opposing rival royal family, of course Serbia would have too. They started pretty much at the same time, but we'll get to that. Anyway, so
does he go back to Serbia at that point? Does he go to Serbia? I mean,
Paul goes to Serbia as part of the luggage. King Peter is invited back. There's a coup which involves, of course, bloodshed. The Obrenović, king and queen, have their heads chopped off, their body parts disseminated and littered around the courtyard of the palace to make an attractive entrance for the incoming King Peter with my grandfather, who's 10 years old. And this is his introduction to his country, which he knows. What does he know? He doesn't speak the language. He never sees his father again until he becomes a regent, which psychologically is also fascinating that his father would be overlooked. But so Paul is there, he's young, he's age 10, he's put in military uniform, he's given a couple of pistols, he's given a room at the top of they call it a palace, but it's really barracks, it's male only, and all meals are held in some huge banquet hall, and in uniform, and he's 10, but that's his life now. So by the time he's 13, 14, obviously he's learned some more languages, because that's what you do there, and he's in with the ruling house, the ruling family, so he's exposed to foreigners, a lot of whom are English diplomats. And that's where he developed his probably first interest. And he was, by nature, a very civilized person. He was not at all like his father, who I am probably quite like. But he was just born civilized. He was a pacifist. He loved art. He loved beautiful things. He loved learning.
He loved Oxford.
Well, it wasn't that he loved Oxford. It was that he met these British diplomats, and it sounded, I'm guessing, obviously, because when I knew him, I didn't know any of this story. He was just my lovely, funny, wonderful, warm grandfather. That's what I knew, which was maybe good that I didn't know anything. I just had a blissful experience with both my grandparents, but I had no idea what they had gone through. So when he's in Serbia at the court, it's all extremely serious. The world governments are not recognizing the Karadjordjevic as authentic. They're disputing why the Obrenović family lost their heads. So there are even a few years where it's just not even official, but they're there and they're not leaving. And so for Paul, who has no parents, he's a sort of vaguely distant cousin of the people who are in charge and is not related or familiar or friendly with anyone, doesn't know anybody there. So he has to catch up. And there are these British diplomats, and he makes friends with them, and that obviously opened his eyes to even knowing about Oxford, because the the way it had always gone is that you went to a military academy so that you could slice the head off all the better. But my grandfather just was not made of that metal, and he had no interest. There's a photograph of him, age 10, with his pistols, and you can just, his hands are not even touching, they're hovering over it. Many men or boys would have loved that. It just wasn't for him. So
eventually he comes to Christchurch, was it?
Well, he comes to England, and of course, coming to England for him is a great excuse to go through Europe, which is civilized. When he arrives in Serbia, he probably had a horrible shock. It was in a mess. It's a horrible reason to have come back. People have been killed. It's very traumatic, no doubt. Also, he has no parents. So he becomes more and more interested in England and Oxford specifically, I think as a way to escape and not be part of the military and not be part of this bloodthirstiness that is going on, that was essential at its time for what needed to happen. But he didn't want to be a part of that. So he came to Oxford in 1913, and I'm sure he arrived by train. And his clothes he had a lot of money because he had his mother's fortune, which was second largest in Russia to the Tsar, because they were the Halliburton, essentially. They made all the guns
again.
Yeah, well, lots of dough. So he had plenty of money, and he comes to Oxford, and he gets ridiculed for his clothing, because how would he? Everything was brand new, but it was not au courant. And so he was mocked for that, and he said, well, I'll go to Jermyn Street and correct that, no problem. And I'm sure he looked a lot better than a lot of the locals, because he was a handsome man to begin with. He's a prince, he's extremely wealthy, and now he's well-dressed.
And very cultured as well. I mean, he became very
Well, he's
cultured
already
now.
speaking 5 languages at this point. So even though he's a hick, if you want to call him that, he's a Serb, he's a peasant, you can say whatever you want, it's all true. But he's also extremely refined, just by nature. And Serbian was his 4th language that he learned. So a lot was asked of a small boy. So in 1913, for him, it was a great escape, but it also meant that he could visit all his family in Europe. And he had, from his mother's side, there was a lot of family in Italy with the grandest of villas. Just imagine the grandest of villas and then times that by 100. So he was very happy to leave Serbia and come to England, because it meant lots of trips and lots of staying with relatives. So that was kind of a good excuse for him.
So I'm going to move it on a bit, so we just have a look at a few images, because there's the Greek side. I mean, that's King George of Greece, King George II, but the lady on the arm of King Paul is Princess Nicholas, who was Princess Olga's mother, and then there's 2 of the sisters in the background.
Now, the scary-looking lady is a Romanov.
She certainly is. But all I remember about her is particularly that her view of life was God first, then the Russian Grand Dukes, and then the rest, in that order, very much.
But I think she meant, like, now it's time for me to rest.
I think she certainly did.
You've asked enough questions.
But also here's just to set the scene, is your grandmother with a number of grandchildren.
I'm the one in the little dress.
And again.
That looks like a boy. And now I'm in my grandmother's arms. This is Dimitri and Michelle, if you know my cousins. Do you know Dimitri? He's on the, whatever that is, the left, the right.
Yeah.
I don't know. Anyway, Michelle, and then my sister Catherine in the middle.
And then there's the 2 sisters.
That house, by the way, is Pratolino.
Pratolino, yeah.
Which is an amazing villa. It's now a museum. But that was where we would go for holidays, and we all played. We were not allowed in the kitchen, and some people have even asked me, "My gosh, if you were not allowed to go in, why didn't you go in?" And I said, "Well, because you should have seen the park that we had to play in, which included a statue the size of Oxford. It had stairs and rooms in it, and Paul, my grandfather, he was a wonderful grandfather, very warm, and he would we would all play in the statue, which is...
And here we've got Princess Olga with Princess Marina, and I think I've found a quote that
Sisters.
the two sisters, Prince Paul said, he never could quite work out what they were all laughing about so much.
Well, these two girls, there was another sister, Elizabeth. There's three of them. They're Greek princesses. They're born in a palace in Greece when their family is ruling. So that's a mentality that you're just born into. That's what you know. And then almost, not immediately, but quite soon, they're exiled. And that would go on. They would be exiled 3 times in the 20th century. But the first time, all I'll say is they managed incredibly well. Nobody shed tears, nobody whined, nobody complained. They'd managed, they had no money, they had nothing. And they just got on with it, like you Brits know how to do. But, they had that steeliness also. It doesn't mean that they enjoyed it or that they weren't worried. They were. I've read my grandmother's diaries, and that, there's a lot of anxiety there, but they held it together.
And then, of course, Princess Marina married the Duke of Kent, brother of George VI, as you know, and there's another nice photograph of her later on. But the two sisters were very close, weren't they?
Well, they're 3 sisters.
And the 3 sisters.
And they were all close.
Yes.
And partly why they were so close, and they had a sort of invented language of their own, is because they were frequently countryless. So they were very bonded because who do you trust? When you keep moving around, you're thrown out of countries, you're brought back. And so the family unit was very important and very tight. And it made other people uncomfortable around them, but too bad, because they were going through an extraordinary circumstance, and they were just doing their best.
And then I wanted to introduce your mother.
Sexy mama.
And we've got a number of pictures of her, which we can skim past just to put it in context. But that's you, Christina?
No, that's Catherine.
Oh, that's Catherine, okay. And that's Catherine.
And that's Catherine.
And then, okay, so why do I share
this
this
is Hugo's idea of sense of humor.
This is my idea of sense of humor. So you've got, this is the mill with the Duke and Duchess of Windsor. In the background, you may spot Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor. And so
why would Hugo find that funny? Well, because after Elizabeth Taylor was fed up the first time around with Richard Burton, well, this is my summation of this. I may be wrong, I frequently am, but who cares? This is a good story. I think that he was with my mother just to stick it to Elizabeth Taylor. He was with my mother for a year. My mother doesn't party. Richard did. And it got on her nerves.
You can see that there, can't you?
Well, you see, that's the general atmosphere. Now, I loved Richard because he was very funny and he liked children, which makes it very easy to like anyone. And he would frequently just deck a photographer. He would warn them first. He didn't just come out of the blue like some Kanye West. He would say, okay, that's enough. That's enough shots. He had warned them. And then I would be waiting for the fun to begin, because of course they would never obey, and of course they would take that extra shot, and he'd deck them. And down they went, which I was 8. I thought this was hilarious. Maybe it's a Serbian thing. My mother didn't like it at all.
As we can see here.
She used to make Catherine and I snip all of his cigarettes at the halfway mark. So he just bought more cigarettes. And then she made me play tricks with him that he and I played hangman a lot together. Fascinating, right? Anyway, so what she told me was that since I had monopolized his time, that I should really help out with the drinking issue. I was 9, and so my job was to wait for him to come up with a letter for me to put on the hangman thing. And then right before, as soon as he was reaching for the glass, then I'd ask. It was just this trick that we played. So anyway, we'd finish the hangman, he'd have the glass would be filled, and he'd just swig the whole thing. So the trick did not work. He was a professional drinker, and he was not going to be outdone by a 9-year-old. But I had instructions by my mother, so I did as I was told for a while.
And so what's going on here? This is your mother again, right?
Yes, Mama gets dressed up and photographed a lot through the years. Sometimes with us, sometimes not.
And here she is. What's she doing here?
I think she's impersonating.
I think she's going in a
Little
film
Orphan
or
Annie,
something.
or-
Yes. These
And Demi Moore, maybe? I don't know.
looks a bit like that. And then there she is with Richard Burton. This must be a film
She's
or something.
proposing to him? No.
Oh.
What happened was, we were in Switzerland at his house, and he thought, or somebody thought it would be funny to make a movie because he's a movie star. Haha. I know, lame, but that's what they did. So I went with Richard to the camera shop, and he bought everything. So the shop was thrilled. And we went back to the chalet, and we made this movie with Catherine, me, my mother, starring Richard Burton, and my little brother Nicholas. And this movie has been lost. I'm so sorry to tell you. I know it's heartbreaking to hear, but that is gone. Thank God.
But there was another scene here which is kind of amusing. I mean,
I probably wrote that scene from off.
And there you are with your mother?
Yes. This is my first book party. This is a book called Taxi. It's just as stupid as it sounds. It's a collection of anecdotes of funny things that happen to people in taxicabs, which means it's a very slim volume. But this is the party for the book. And this party was given at Stringfellows, who I think is a sort of dirty cat, as we call them in America. And anyway.
And there we go back to the beginning with Karadjordjevic.
Now, here's what is interesting to me. This man's name is George Petrovich. All Serbian names end in IC, and it's pronounced exactly like bitch. Very easy to remember. So Petrovich, it's like Johnson, Anderson, Peterson. It means son of. Vich is son of. So this is George, son of Peter. But his parents were pacifists, normal, you can call them peasants if you like. They came from an area of Serbia. It's quite near Belgrade, about 45 minutes away. It's called Shumadija, which means the forested area. It's hilly and poplar forests, very beautiful. And that's where he's from. And the natural industry of the place is pig farming, but not in any kind of modern standard sense. They were just running around in the forest eating acorns. So what could be easier than to bag a few and sell them to the Austrians who like to eat the pig? And also, it was a very clever move because they were, of course, as you know, being sat on by the Ottomans who feared the pig. So what a great industry to be in, where your product will not be robbed. So it had a lot of benefits. It wasn't a money-making thing, it was just that's what that area of the country did, and also the Turks didn't like it, so it was a plus. But by this point, when Karadjordjevic is maturing, the Turks have long since sort of subjugated their authority to the Janissary, who are Serbian, but they are brought up almost like North Korean military. They belong to the Turks, but they are in fact blood Serbs. But they've become lethal, and they've become arrogant, and they've become bloated with their power, and they're as ruthless as the Turks. Power goes to a lot of people's heads. And Karadjordjevic, well, his name was not Karadjordjevic yet, his name was George. George just didn't like this. And so he killed a few of these Turks when he saw them berating his fellow Serbs. And the Turks were just not into that, because they had been ruling now for 500 years, and they were in the habit of being the boss. So because he was so unruly, they called him Kara, which means black in Turkish.
Okay.
So Karadjordjevic is the most famous name in Serbia, and it is a Turkish insult. How about that?
And the family name, in a way.
Absolutely. We call ourselves Sons of Black George.
Yes, brilliant. But I mean, and King Peter said of him, "My grandfather is of peasant stock. I'm prouder of that than any of my throne. Crowns are lost, but the pure blood of those who have loved the earth does not die."
Yes, but
So
he had a crown on his head when he was saying that.
Well,
so
it makes it a bit easier. Yeah.
difference is that Karadjordjevic didn't want to be a king. He didn't want any money. He wasn't interested. He was illiterate. He didn't care. Wasn't interested in learning to read or write. He was a very ordinary peasant with a very bad temper. And when he saw one too many of his fellow Serbs being badly treated, he just had a bad temper and he would kill them. And so the Turks had put him on the hit list, so he had to run away. He goes to Austria, he hides out, he fights for the Austrians, learns some military skills, and then comes back and organizes a coup. He gets some cannons, he gets some fellow pig farmers, and they kick the Turks out. One of those fellow rebels was a man named Obrenović, who was very greedy and fat. And he wanted everything Karadjordjevic had. At this point, he is called Karadjordjevic by everyone, and although it was an insult, it's been turned into a thing of glory, a thing to be proud of. You know, if the Turks fear you, then you're the big man. So he called himself Karadjordjevic with great pride. But this Obrenović cat, who was really a businessman and acquisitive and greedy and pompous, he wanted what Karadjordjevic had. So Karadjordjevic...
He got murdered, didn't he, in the end? Or?
Well, he does get murdered because he has to leave the country again. He's in exile again. The Turks are not taking it. You know, they're not going to just leave. The battle began in 1804 because of him, but then they're not going to just go away. So for the next 100 years, first Karadjordjevic is fighting with the Turks, and then Obrenović phones the Turks and says, "Hey, guess what? Want to make a deal?" And they said, "Sure, what do you got?" And he said, "Well, I would like to be a prince. And what would you like? Would you like George Petrovich's head?" And they said, "Yeah, we would." So that was what happened. Karadjordjevic was in, I think, Russia at that point and lamenting his homeland, wanting very much to go home. Yelena, his wife, and all his children were already back home. And he was a family man. He was a farmer and a family man. That's all he cared about. He wasn't interested in anything royal or fancy. But he thinks he's at the end of his life. He wants to die at home. So he sends word to Obrenović, "May I have safe passage home?" Of course, be my guest. Take this route. And he did. And the way Obrenović carried out his plan was he had Karadjordjevic's most loyal manservant come and get the news, whatever parchment that said yes, can come, blah. So, but Obrenović said to him, "You must kill him," and he gives the job to his most loyal.
That often happens, doesn't it? Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Yes,
well, I guess you're next then.
It's always a trusted person, that they get hold of.
So yeah, he goes back to tell Karadjordjevic, "Yes, you can go back," and cuts his head off, and the head is is delivered to Constantinople on a silver platter, I hope, real silver at least. And Obrenović is made a prince, and that is why a monarchy happens at all, because Karadjordjevic was not interested in titles. He wasn't going towards creating anything like that. He wanted to just go home to his farm and his wife. But now he's dead, and you've got Obrenović with all his fancy. Obrenović was a businessman, not a farmer. And he wasn't a bad guy. He just was very ambitious. And that's how he achieved his goal.
And then he had a son called Alexander. He was a prince, wasn't he? But
well, because now there's suddenly a monarchy, so the name continues. Prince Alexander lives most of his life on the border with Romania because, if you haven't noticed, Serbs squabble. And you can't really have two royal families. So, either Obrenović or Karadjordjevic was living on the border. One was ruling, one was on the border, and they were trying to get rid of each other.
He's followed by he becomes a king, this one, King Peter. He comes back in 1903
Well, that's because the Obrenovićes were hanging around,
wonderful.
polishing the crown, and they were not disliked until the last Obrenović, who married an ugly old bag who was barren. And they were like, okay, we draw the line. This is not on. And murkily, King Peter, who is not a king yet, but is a Karadjordjevic, and is, of course, living in exile. It's not really confirmed whether he was involved in the killing of the last Obrenovićes or not. It's assumed that he was. But I don't think it matters, because it was going to happen anyway. The Serbs were fed up with them. They didn't like how he was ruling. She couldn't have children. She was positioning her brother's children. And they didn't want, this was not, no, they were like, bring the Karadjordjevics back. We don't want any more of this mess. So King Peter, who's living in Geneva, which is where my grandfather showed up, aged 2 or 3.
Of course, yeah.
And that's why my grandfather went to Serbia in 1903 with Peter and the whole retinue, because Serbia suddenly needs they've been invited back, and that's why Paul goes there. But he's really a foreigner, except that he's a prince. His name is Prince of Serbia.
So I want to move it on a little bit again. We've got these two figures who come into your grandfather's life, which is Churchill and Eden.
Right.
But maybe we should talk about King Alexander the First of, he would have been called Yugoslavia by that stage.
Well, he created Yugoslavia.
Yes.
So he was Prince of Serbia. This is the son of Peter.
Son of King Peter.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Everybody is called Peter or Alexander.
Yes.
Not helpful. Anyway, so this is the son, and he's born into it, and he takes it very seriously. In fact, too seriously. He keeps everyone out of his business. So, which ends up being a problem for my grandfather.
Because
in 1934, he goes to Marseille. This is Alexander. He goes to Marseille on a state visit. He's going to go all over France, but it's those days, so he takes his destroyer, the Dubrovnik, as one does, and he lands at Marseille, and he's met by whatever
French
his name
Minister
is,
Bartu, yeah.
And they proceed through the town. But of course, everybody knows they're coming, and very soon, and it's on YouTube. And this is how I wrote this chapter from watching this footage on YouTube of Alexander being shot in the face and dying, blood trickling dramatically down his jaw. So he's dead. And the only thing he had ever said to my grandfather, who he kept at arm's reach, not because he didn't like him, but because of a sense of paranoia. Maybe that's a Serbian thing. Maybe it's something that happens to people when they get in power and they don't want to share it. I don't know. You can keep guessing. But all he had ever said to my grandfather was, if anything happens to me, there's a letter in my desk. So something did happen to him. So my grandfather, Paul, goes to the desk, retrieves a letter that is sealed with wax, opens it and reads it, and it says, "You're up." Obviously not worded quite so cleverly, but anyway, that's why my grandfather becomes regent of Yugoslavia.
So that must have means it means a huge change in his life, because he's basically a scholar and a collector.
He's a total aesthete. He has no interest. It didn't bother him at all that Alexander didn't want to talk to him about politics, because he didn't care. He didn't like it. I think from the age of 10, when he met with, a hideous scene, he was put off. He wanted a beautiful life with paintings and croquet, like you guys. So, like normal civilized people.
And then, of course, there's also, there was left a widow. How does she fit in, Queen Marie? She was a Romanian princess.
She's a Romanian princess, and she had a strange reputation because she was overweight and a bit dour. People held those things against her, which is pretty trivial. She was a good person. She was a good wife. She was a good mother. She had 3 children. What I find most interesting is that in 1938, she's moved to England. She does not leave her husband and her children or her new country. She's moved there by Churchill. Now, obviously this means that as of 1938, he's already got his plans. This is proof, because one son is left. Why does he leave one son in Serbia? Why does he take her away at all, right? Who is he to tell her what to do? Anyway, she does go there, and I met one of the sons, Tomislav. Maybe some of you ever met him.
He was in the picture with Alexander just before.
I met him in Kent when I grew up in England. We all grew up out of Yugoslavia or Serbia, or whatever they're calling themselves these days. Probably Belgrade at this point. But Peter is kept back, and that to me is a clue that
and he's the
war
king,
plans.
He's the king. He's the king.
Well, he's 14 years old. My grandfather is the regent.
There they are together.
Yes, and my grandfather, as you can see, is very actively trying to hand over as much information as he can, the opposite of how Alexander had treated him. He wants to give the reign. As far as he's concerned, in 1934, when he gets notification that he's going to be running the country until young Peter turns 18, which is going to be August 1941. Just keep that date in your mind. My grandfather thinks, okay, it's my duty. This is mine to do. I've only got this amount of years to do it, and I'll do it. He was brought up in a very militaristic, duty-oriented mentality. So he did that. He did as he was supposed to. I'm an American. I feel very differently about things. But as you can see, he's talking to Peter. He's showing him things. He's always got Peter when he's lining up the meeting with the troops. He's always got Peter by his side. He's training him. He's showing him, because he doesn't want power. He does not want to be a king. He has no interest. He wants to go back to his life. Now, in 1939, Churchill, obviously, for many years, as of 1930 even, everybody knows who Hitler is. Everybody knows he's a problem. In 1933, there was a huge exodus from Germany because people could see what was coming. Okay, this is not like, 1939, it all just blew up. No, this has been going on for 10 years at least. People saw, people knew, and the smart ones left. A lot of the smart ones left. And my grandfather is at this point begging England and America, and this is all in letters that I've seen, because everything is beautifully archived at Columbia University, thankfully. So there are many letters from my grandfather to England, to America, saying, could you help? We're very tiny. We have a small army. There's only so much we can do. And Hitler wants to walk through Yugoslavia because he's got designs on Greece and Africa and the globe. And America isn't involved in the war yet. Then they don't even know that they're going to be. I mean, I don't know that for sure. Who knows really what anybody's ever thinking? But their stance was that they were not involved. So he's really only got Churchill to rely on. And Churchill says, don't worry about it. You just hold off Hitler. Do your best. We'll back you up. We'll be there. You'll be fine. Hitler. Yeah, hold off Hitler. Really? So he goes to Germany on this state visit because Churchill says, no, play along, just play along, just tell him whatever he wants to hear, and just carry on. We've got your back. Huge lie. Now, as you can see, my grandfather is sitting next to Hitler, and my grandfather is staring at the ground, and that is because he's mortified. Mortified. He knows who this man is. He does not want to be there. It's not his choice. He's been told to do this. And again, you've got to always go back, at least I do, and remind myself. He was brought up with a very disciplined military situation. There was no teddy bears. There was no tea parties. There was nothing cozy about his childhood. So when he was told to do something, he did it, and he did it to perfection. So there he is. And what is not perfection is that he's making it pretty clear.
He's uncomfortable.
That he does not want to be there.
No.
But he did it. And I regret that he did anything he was told to do. And I would tell him that. If I had known anything when I was young, I didn't. But I would have said, you should have just told them all, sod it. I'm going to California. I've got plenty of money. I can live a beautiful. Why do I have to do this? He didn't have to do it, but that's not his mentality at all.
So then he went to England, of course, because with him with your mother. They
Mama.
Brought him on a state visit here.
Mama
in
is born in Serbia. She's a princess. She has her own bodyguards. She speaks Serbian. She knows nothing other than that. For her, that's completely normal. So she would meet with a great shock pretty soon.
Yeah. Well, we talked a bit about Churchill, but obviously you're very much of the view that Churchill thoroughly let him down, but eventually he had to leave, didn't he? He had to leave Belgrade, your grandfather.
Well, no, he didn't have to at all. He had a choice. Okay. They said, we'll shoot you in the head or you can leave. So, he didn't have to. But unfortunately, in 1913, when my grandfather went to Oxford, which was a thrill for him, he was away from warring people. Everyone always constantly talking about war. He was not into it. So he comes to Oxford, he's got all this new kit, he's all dressed up, everything's perfect, and he's thrilled to be here. All he wants to do is learn. He loves everything. Everything is beautiful, it's civilized. I mean, you guys did do got all that stuff, right? So, and he loved it. It was his milieu. He was comfortable with that. But it's 1913. And so while his classmates perhaps are laughing at his clothes, he's thinking about Serbia, and he's got his eye on what's going on back there, and things are already bubbling up. Trouble is already happening. So in 1914, of course, he has to go because he's a member of the ruling family, therefore he's a soldier, therefore he's part of the army. So he has to leave Oxford and go to war. And he does. He spends a year in Belgrade. It was a pretty miserable year. I think because it just wasn't his liking, this kind of thing. There's maybe some men even in this room who would have loved the opportunity to go and be a soldier and be a warrior. And, there's a lot of romanticism in that, if you want to look at it that way. But he didn't feel that way at all. So he does, but he's duty bound. That's what he knows. So he does what he has to do. He goes. He's part of the army, and he ends up in 1916. He's in Corfu because at that point Yugoslavia has been trampled on, and King Peter led the army on horseback, age 71 and infirm. Yes. Yeah. He led them over the Albanian mountains in the wintertime. That's a real king. That's a real leader. That's somebody one can respect. And Paul then met up with him in Corfu and worked with the Red Cross until World War I was over, and then he came back to Oxford in 1919, I believe, and he got what you call a war degree. So he met Anthony Eden when he was first here in 1913. Then he goes to war, and obviously this will have changed his mind more about more things, insofar as how much he dislikes it, and how much he wants to have a very civilized life and live in Italy in this villa that he inherited. And where are we now?
Well, I tell you what, we're almost at the end, so we must talk, I think, a bit about your grandmother, because you spent a lot of time with her, and then we can.
My grandmother was an amazing human being. She was considered austere, but that's because she was extremely private and
shy.
I disagree. I think, first of all, lift your hand if you're not shy. Is anybody in this room not shy? Well, there you go. That's the percentage. There you go. So she was average, Maybe she didn't like meeting 800 new people all the time. Plus, she's not in her homeland. She's exiled 3 times from Greece. She's a Greek princess. She's also exiled from Yugoslavia. This woman went through a series of dramatic episodes that, would get you on Dr. Phil in America, all right? She never complained. She never wrote a book about it. She never whined to anyone about it. And it's not because she was so tough. It was just that she was elegant. She had good manners. She was...
You were saying that when you used to see her in Paris, she wasn't terribly familiar with the...
Well, she was...
The house?
Okay, there's a wonderful scene where the cook... My grandfather is now dead. There's less money. They're now in a small house in the Rue Cheffer, 16e arrondissement. And it's not tiny, but it's not a palace. And anyway, the chef is retiring, and my grandmother said to me, I want to go and say thank you and goodbye. So, will you come with me? So, of course. So off we go, and we carry on, we go up and down stairs, and round, and up and back, and this is a part of the house we had never been in. And we realized we didn't have a clue. We never found the kitchen. We never found it. That was her life. But she was also...
Traveling on the bus?
Well, I mean, she got around Paris on the buses. She was perfectly... She was a very ladylike, tough woman. She always had a hat and gloves to go out, as one did, but she would take the bus. And in the old days... Some of you maybe are old enough to remember this. When one took a plane, when you got off the plane, all the stewardesses, or whatever they were called then, would line up as you walked out. Well, so my grandmother, who had been trained, when you see a line of people, you stop, you shake hands with everyone, you have a word with them. So when we flew from Paris to London, she would do this. And they didn't have a clue who she was or why she was doing this. But that was her training. That's what she knew. And she did. She was extremely polite. She had something to say to everyone, charming, shook their hands and moved along. And it took an hour to get out of the plane. But that is really what anachronism is all about. You know, there's this collision of cultures, of what she knew, what she thought was right, what she didn't know, what she had no idea was. My sister, I wasn't going to bring this up, but it's too good. My sister asked her once, if I win an Oscar, will you come to the ceremony? And my grandmother said, what is an Oscar?
Very good.
Right.
Very good.
So she was just in another century, you know, in many ways. She set up a bank account for me once. This is really revealing. She set up a bank account for me once because she thought I needed a little help. And it was at Coots, of course. And I got £5 a month transferred because she's in the 16th century. And so she had done this unbelievably sweet, charming, thoughtful thing. Wasn't terribly helpful because Coots charges you £75 a year to have an account.
No.
So I owed them. I owed Coots money. That didn't work out.
This is your grandmother. I'm a hopeless chairman because we're running over time in a second.
No
but,
problem. Good.
Just to say,
you're all free soon.
At the end, more recently.
Let me just say that while our family was exiled repeatedly, I mean, really to the point of comedy, in and out, we didn't even bother packing anymore. We're just like, okay. So for 200 years or whatever it is since 1804. That we've not really been allowed to live in Serbia, or else we're allowed to rule Serbia. Then we're not allowed to live there, then or we're going to be killed. And then up until 2008, in the Constitution, any member of my family, and that does include me, would be shot on sight if we entered the country. So none of us grew up with any curiosity or interest to go there or learn the language or the history, or like, well, you know, I'll go to America. But King Peter built this crypt. This is our family crypt. And it's the second largest mosaic church in the world. It's unbelievably beautiful. It's the chandelier that you see is melted swords from the Revolution.
Yes.
And the coffins are King Peter and Karadjordjevic. And then downstairs...
That's a reburial of your grandparents.
Terrible picture. This is there's a whole downstairs. No, I'm so mean. Poor Hugo. And he's the star. So anyway, yeah. So this is downstairs, goes on and on and on. There's plenty of us dead. They're all there. They all call their names. Like we've got a Cleopatra, which I love. And I think there's even room for me there. So having been homeless and countryless and stateless for 200 years, we do have somewhere to go.
And then they went back. Your
And there they are.
And Nicholas, yeah.
Yeah.
And sort of there is King Peter, but I just wanted to just maybe end with the...
So the current situation is we have a crown prince, Alexander is his name. He was born in Claridge's because Churchill is a magician, and he turned Room 212 into Yugoslavia for 24 hours. So Alexander could be born in Yugoslavia. Now, if you think about it, it's kind of childish to even think that way. Oh, we'll just call it Yugoslavia for a minute. It's very hard to respect grown-ups when they pull acts like that. You just think, come on, grow up. We're in England. He's born in England. A fact is a fact. You know, it's cute in C.S. Lewis stories, but this is reality. This is a man. This is a human. This is his life. He's told, oh no, it's Yugoslavia for now, and don't worry, you're going back, you will be king, all of which is a lie. And they introduce him to, I'm talking about Peter at this point.
Sorry,
this is Alexander.
Yeah, he's the one who was born there.
Yeah, we no longer have anything to do with Yugoslavia at this point, because Churchill double-crossed my grandfather and was in cahoots with Tito, and he put Tito in power, yes, And it's all documented. No one has ever believed anything I say, by the way. People ask me at the time and then get a second opinion. So I understand that you don't believe me, and I don't mind, because no one ever does. But you can research, you can Google it. It is what happened.
Yeah.
It's why we got thrown out.
Anyway, it's a nice picture because I know you were very, very fond of your grandmother, and
Yes.
there she is, rather elegant in the background, as she would have been in
I
in
was
sort of
very
later
close
life.
with my
She's
grandmother,
great.
which was very lucky for me because she was a very elegant lady.
And I'm going to get into terrible trouble because
Because we're done.
we've already
You're
done,
free
but
to go.
Thank you very much. Thank you,
Thank you
Christina.
so much for listening, and go to Serbia. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it is. A lovely place. Thank you.
Thank you.